how can you get bored of squash? I mean, it's the most exciting food there is. It's mid-November, I've been eating squash for 3 months. I'm in a squash rut, so I decided, you know what? I'm gonna mix it up this week. I'm gonna try something new. So today will be my first attempt at the Hasselback butternut squash from Bon Appetit. Let's see how it goes. I'll leave the ingredient quantities in the description box below. Butternut squash, apple cider vinegar, maple syrup, and spicy chili, salt, pepper, oil, and bay leaves, tools, measuring devices, etc. So to start, take your butternut squash and you're going to cut it lengthwise, trying to keep both stems intact. So I'm just going down in the middle, cutting across, rotating the squash, lining up my knife cut, and going down, spinning the squash around, and then trying to meet it where it ended. So the skin is pretty tough, so this takes a little bit of work to cut through, but if you have a sharp knife, it's not too challenging. So this is what the inside looks like. And then next up, you're going to want to clean out all the seeds, just like you're taking the inside out of a pumpkin. So I grabbed a sturdy spoon and just kind of scrape it out into a garbage bowl. And then you are going to peel the squash. So I'm using just a straight peeler. The recipe video called for a Y peeler. I don't know that there's necessarily a difference. Now I'm transferring to a baking sheet, topping with about a tablespoon of olive oil, and then rubbing that in. So you don't need to really massage it in, it's just the hard squash. So I think this is just giving kind of a jump start on the cooking process by having that layer of oil down, plus it helps the seasoning stick. Then kosher salt sprinkled on pretty liberally, along with some fresh cracked black pepper all over the surface. And then you're going to put that into a 425-degree oven. So while the squash is baking, you're going to make the glaze, combining the maple syrup, butter, and the apple cider vinegar just into a kind of small medium-sized saucepan, and then taking the spicy chili. The recipe called for Fresno. I couldn't find Fresno, so I'm just using a fingerling chili. Thinly slicing it. You want to get these pretty thin because you're going to use it as a garnish at the end. I left the ribs and the seeds in. I like it a little bit spicier. So transferring that over to the burner, and basically we're just bringing this up over medium-high heat, stirring it kind of occasionally, and we're trying to reduce this and get it to thicken up some. So this is kind of the cooking process. You can see that there's definitely a color change happening here. You're not really making caramel, but you are looking for it to darken up, get a little bit more amber, and then you take the chilies out once it reaches the spice level you like. So that looks like it's coating the pan, so calling that good. Pulling the squash out of the oven, I ended up needing to cook it for about 25 minutes. My squash was about 4 pounds versus the 3 that the recipe called for, so that kind of slowed down the bake time. Now this is the actual Hasselbacking process, so you're thinly slicing the squash here so that you can kind of get the flavor to go between those layers. So my slices are about 1/4 inch wide, which going back I would slice it more thinly. This video sped up quite a bit. This took me a while, using the chopsticks on either side to prevent cutting all the way through the squash. And that's also why I'm using the flat-bladed knife versus a curved chef's knife. Prior to putting back in the oven, brushing with the glaze, slipping the bay leaves in between a few of the slices, and that's just going to kind of perfume the squash while it cooks. I'm tucking them in pretty deeply because I don't want them to get all burnt while in the oven. Re-seasoning with salt and pepper, and then we're going to go ahead and put this back into the oven for 45 to 60 minutes, brushing with the glaze every 10 minutes. So the recipe didn't specify how to tell when the squash was done. So each time I pulled it out of the oven, I just poked a knife in the side to see whether the squash was tender or still pretty firm. So it's just a lot of brushing and kind of waiting around for this squash to cook. So you can kind of see the progression. It's gradually picking up color, getting a little caramelization on the aluminum foil. You can see it really bubbling around the edges. So I cooked it for 45 minutes total, transferring it to my serving plate, and you can see the bulb ends actually started to collapse. And so that's really when I said, this is probably done cooking, whether it is or not. And now just garnishing with the reserved chilies that I pulled out of the sauce earlier. So this is the final presentation. It looks pretty similar to the Bon Appetit version in the upper corner. So while it's still warm, let's give it a taste. First, this is what it looks like. So we got pretty close. I could have definitely cut the slices a little bit thinner. Mine are about a 1/4 inch thick. So it's not quite as elegant looking, but let's see how it goes. There's actually kind of like a kind of a firmer texture on the outside where that glaze is kind of caramelized and soaked into the squash a little bit. So it's good. The flavor is definitely in there. I can taste it. I think if I had sliced more thinly, the flavor would have gotten down deeper into the squash, but overall, pretty good. Yeah, if you don't like it, you're out $5 and an hour and a half of time in the kitchen, but if you do like it, it's something new to add to your winter-fall rotation. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and click subscribe. Got a lot of new videos in production and I don't want you to miss out. See you next week.